to come to power, it had to make struggle and actually initiate a whole revolutionary movement to overthrow the nobility that existed in Europe, and that even had implications throughout the Americas. And they did this in the name of democracy, democracy for this new class, the rights for this new class that were being impeded by the existence of the feudal nobility, the kings, landlords, and things like that. The existence of political parties is a recognition of class contradiction in society. It denotes the role of the political organization of the people as a means of acquiring and keeping political power. For African people, I know people don't necessarily think about that when they hear of the Democrats and Republicans or other political parties that exist in the world, but there have not always been political parties. They have generally up in European society that we examining. You start off with this feudalism and the absolute domination of society by the nobility and by the lords. And then the struggle against the nobility and the lords, a whole new class is coming to power, and it comes to power fighting for what it characterized as democracy. Even the term free trade came about as a part of this struggle being raised by a sector of the bourgeoisie, the emerging capitalist class, that wanted the right to sell black people, where the nobility under feudalism had monopolized the right. And so you had various companies that were formed by the nobilities, the kings and queens and things like that, that monopolized slavery and the slave trade. And so you had a whole new group of Cretans who came to the force, and they fought for democratic rights to sell black people too. And you will find that the whole bourgeoisie, the whole white power ruling class came to power fighting for democracy for itself. And most of the democracy that it achieved came at the expense of oppressed Africans and other peoples around the world. So we say that, and then political parties were born in this process. And the whole issue of democracy as was being defined by this emergent class that was revolutionary in the sense that it was a class that was designed to overthrow feudalism. This democracy that it was talking about was something that denoted the role of the political party organization of the people. That is to say, political parties. It denoted the role of the political organization of the people as a means of acquiring and keeping political power. It took such organization to overthrow the nobility and feudalism, and moving further down the line, we see that the political parties in Europe achieve greater significance. For African people, both on the continent of Africa and elsewhere, political parties are even more recent. And this is because, and this is important to understand, because some people will say that political parties did not exist earlier in Africa and some other places because Africa and other places were backwards. But the reality is that the class contradiction did not exist in Africa and some other places as it did in Europe. And so the existence of political parties as manifestations of class and class struggle was unwarranted by those circumstances. So we say for African people, both on the continent of Africa and elsewhere, political parties are even more recent. This is because the European bourgeoisie came to power as a consequence of the slave trade in Africa. Even as it was promoting democracy for itself in Europe, the European bourgeoisie used every available resource to immobilize, disorganize, and suppress the African. This is why class contradictions inside Africa never reached the sharpness of Europe, except as an extension of the power of European bourgeoisie in the form of the African slave catchers or others who carried out the will of the oppressors against the masses of African people. So this is where we see the emergence of a certain kind of class manifestation that has significance, is when Europe intervenes in Africa life through slavery and other things, and a sector of the African population became appendages to its efforts to enslave and colonize us. And then we see the emergence of sharp class distinctions within Africa among African people. For Africans then, the external white enemy became such a dominant force that it served to unite the broadest sector of our community as one oppressed community. This muted or made secondary the contradictions inside our community. Africans generally express the situation as, quote, the white people against the black people, unquote. And when by some chance there was a white individual who stood in apparent support of the demands of black people, or when there was an African who betrayed the demands of black people or a movement, African people would generally sum this up as due to the personal qualities of the individual involved. This was a quote unquote good white man or a quote unquote bad or Uncle Tom black man. The features of class began to achieve definition as early as the first quarter of the 20th century. The struggles of Marcus Garvey with W.E.B. Du Bois, and the communist articulations of the African Blood Brotherhood in the 1920s were early examples of class struggle inside the African community. It was only in the 1960s, though, that the actual objective conditions emerged sharply enough for the class contradictions inside the oppressed, colonized community to become consolidated. The movement of the 1960s was immediately influenced by the concrete material developments of the 50s. So the movement of the 1960s had its origin in contradictions and struggles and developments of the 1950s. During the 1950s, the alliance between our movement and the liberal sector of the white ruling class consolidated itself in mass struggle. In the process, our movement began to achieve a revolutionary character. This movement activated the African victims of US colonialism as conscious participants and impacted on the consciousness and practical life of all the peoples inside the US. This powerful movement overthrew the immediate form of capitalist rule of the Southern white ruling class and achieved legal democratic rights for African people. This struggle became sharp and definitive in the South in the 50s because of the convergence of two important factors, one subjective and the other objective. The subjective factor was the longing by colonially oppressed Africans for freedom from foreign rule, for dignity, and for a better life without brutality and material want. The objective factor was the tremendous growth in the industrial production capacity that followed the Second Imperialist World War, waged in the 1940s to redivide the world among capitalist powers. The war resulted in the US becoming the world's greatest imperialist power, which now possessed either directly or indirectly the colonial raw materials that were previously held exclusively by European powers. This growth in productive capacity multiplied the need for industrial workers almost overnight. These workers could only be found in the South among the African sharecroppers and others who were trapped in a labor-intensive form of the capitalist system. This system required the most oppressive, backwards, and terroristic political methods for its maintenance. For the Northern capitalists, it was absolutely necessary to acquire these workers in order to bring about capitalist expansion and imperialist economic development. This led the liberal industrial sector of the white ruling class to support and encourage the black movement of the South against the kind of Southern capitalist rule that had prevailed since the Civil War. This was a struggle, and we're saying this because we hear often about we need a materialist explanation for the social and political phenomenon that we see in the world. The explanation that we get otherwise is that somehow there was these good white liberals who, for whatever reason, decided to like black people and want us to get education and want us to get such and such. And it doesn't explain anything. I mean, it really doesn't help us to understand anything, because what produced good white people at this moment that would make them such a significant factor, and what is it that defined them as good, and how were they different from the other white people, and how can we go about identifying good white people? Can we get some kind of good white people, a monitor that we can go around testing people? It doesn't help us to understand. It doesn't help our understanding of anything. So we're struggling for the science, and this is what we are achieving right now. So we said that what we were really looking at, this was a struggle against a particular form of capitalist rule, not capitalism itself. Like the liberal white ruling class, the black petty bourgeoisie was only interested in limited revolution. In this way, the alliance between the black petty bourgeoisie and the liberal white ruling class consolidated the leadership of the black petty bourgeoisie over our movement. This alliance. The outcome of this alliance, however, was something that neither the liberal bourgeoisie nor the black petty bourgeoisie could predict, namely the emergence of an African proletariat rising up from the bowels of America itself. When we talk about a proletariat, we're talking about conscious workers, black workers who have become conscious of themselves. This proletariat rapidly became conscious of its own aims and interests, which were not in contradiction with the aims of colonial white power, which were not only in contradiction, rather, with the aims of colonial white power, they were increasingly in contradiction with the aims of the colonized black petty bourgeoisie as well. As these contradictions and in aims and interests began to crystallize, differences in ideology and tactics began to crystallize as well. An inconsistent, though generally materialist philosophy of black nationalism began to emerge out of the aims of the African working class. Black nationalism began to reject the idealist and obscurantist philosophy of the liberal black petty bourgeoisie. Martin Luther King's dream of a better day in America as a consequence of the moral regeneration of whites of the oppressor nation was challenged by the nightmare as defined by Malcolm X. The African proletariat facing objective reality in America raised the demand for black power to determine our own black destiny. The white liberal bourgeoisie required that the black petty bourgeoisie uphold the philosophy of nonviolence as a condition for its support. By the mid-1960s, however, philosophical nonviolence met its fate in the flames of black rebellion that consumed city after city. We were seeing the first full-fledged generation of urban African workers powerfully come to political life as a colonized proletariat becoming conscious of its own class interests. During and subsequent to this period, revolutionary black parties began to emerge. We came to understand the nature of political parties, not only as simple associations of people who have the same general beliefs, but as representatives, as repositories of particular class interests. We saw that parties are the political instruments of particular classes, the projectors and protectors of the will and interests of particular classes, the political concretization of the economic interests of particular classes. This is political parties we're talking about. Political parties are organizations of the most advanced representatives of a particular class. The task of political parties are directly tied to the material interests of the classes they represent. Sometimes elements of a particular class are not aware of their own class interests. There are people from the white ruling class, for example, who are drunks or drug addicts, or even insane. Sometimes elements of the ruling class are wife beaters, bedwetters, or lazy ignoramuses who are unconcerned and disdainful of the overall interests of the capitalist, colonialist ruling class. Nevertheless, some members, and you've probably seen pictures of them. These are the guys who, have the, several 100 feet long yachts and spend their times on luxury beaches with barely clad, bourgeois-defined, beautiful people, sometimes in drunken and otherwise drug stupors, who seem to be oblivious to everything else that's going on around the world. We say that nevertheless, some members and representatives of the white ruling class take it upon themselves to organize into political parties which represent and look out for the interests of the entire class, including the drunks, wife beaters, etc. We call these people the advanced or activist elements of their class. What are the interests of the U.S. capitalist colonialist class? The most fundamental interest of the capitalist colonialist class is the perpetuation of the capitalist system and itself as a ruling class. This fundamental interest gives rise to other interests. Economically, there's the interest to eliminate all economic competition, both domestic and internationally. The interest of the capitalist colonialist ruling class is in dominating the natural resources and markets of the world. Politically, there is the interest in restricting the political liberties of the peoples of the entire world. This is an interest in crushing any political liberties that do not facilitate the economic domination of U.S. capitalists. It is an interest in restricting the development of any independent political expression that would challenge the hegemony of U.S. capitalism. Ideologically, in fact, that is how crime is defined, both inside this country and internationally. Anybody or any group that is effectively challenging the hegemony of U.S. or world capitalism is the term a criminal. A criminal inside the United States is somebody who challenges the hegemony of capital and power of the ruling class. A criminal in the international community is any group, organization that's challenging the hegemony and economic interests of white power capitalism in the world. Ideologically, the interests of the white ruling class are served by idealism and obscurantism, which covers over reality. And that's really important for us to understand, because that's what we constantly find ourselves running into, even among some of the so-called most advanced sectors of people engaged in some kind of struggle with the bourgeoisie, is idealism and obscurantism. Religious stuff that obscures the objective reality that we're looking at, objective conditions and objectively based struggle that we're involved in, the material forces at work that's responsible for our conditions. Because the moment that people understand the material forces at work, that's what people engage in struggling against. Therefore, it's better to clothe and cloak these material forces and to obscure them, obscurantist kind of politic, make them based on good and evil, religious and some other kind of stuff, melanin deficit thereof, any kind of stuff that takes away from the actual material forces at work that's responsible for how forces are acting in society. So to obscure that, idealism, obscurantism, Jesus, Allah, any other stuff like that, that's the interest ideologically of the white ruling class. This keeps the oppressed and exploited peoples, especially the African working class, separated from an understanding of their own material interests. So if you're being oppressed, if the police are shooting us down in the communities, we look for an understanding not in the material relationships that we have with this country, with white power. We go to some book or some verse in the Bible or the Quran or something else like that. That's what we mean about keeping us separated from an understanding of our own material interests. It keeps oppressed and exploited peoples ignorant of science and a scientific approach to an examination of the nature of class exploitation and national oppression. Ideologically, the interest of the white ruling class gives rise to ideological imperialism, the imperialist imposition of its worldview and ideology unto oppressed peoples. So ideological imperialism means that what you have is the worldview of white power of the imperialists that's imposed on to the African population, so that we don't even have access to our own ideas that we can use to overcome our enemies. It's like getting into a fight with Mike Tyson in the boxing ring and using his approach to fight him, as opposed to using his weaknesses as something that we attack, because we don't even understand anything about his weaknesses nor our own strength. We have imposed upon us the philosophy or the worldview of the oppressor. So we say that imperialist domination of ideology is consistent with the economic domination of the capitalist system. During the 60s, Black political parties began to emerge from within the colonized African population in the US as a result of the internal pressures of class contradictions. As these contradictions began to crystallize, they revealed a colonial society that was much more complex than before. Before the movement won our legal democratic rights, it was all of us Blacks against them whites. The US government was not generally recognized as an agent of a particular class and social system. Our movement, under the leadership of the Black petty bourgeoisie, courted the various US presidents assiduously, hoping to find a quote unquote good president who was sympathetic to the general democratic aims and demands of the movement. This is written 30 years ago that we're talking about. Now, what we find ourselves having in the African community is a good president in the form of Barack Hussein Obama. By 1965, after a decade of most intense struggle, our movement won the vote and our legal democratic rights. In the process, the Black petty bourgeoisie was growing as a result of the effectiveness of the movement and the intervention of the liberal white bourgeoisie. With the vote and legal rights, the basic aspirations of the Black middle class were in effect realized. For them, the movement had reached its goal. For the new generation of fully mobilized African workers that was thrust onto the scene as the main social factor in the US political life, its aspirations were far from being met by gaining legal democratic rights. The attempts by the petty bourgeoisie to moderate the Black liberation movement, to decelerate it and direct it toward liberal bourgeois democratic sops, were met with the cries of "Burn, baby, burn" in Los Angeles and Black Power in Mississippi. At this point, the immediate aspirations of Burn, baby, burn, Los Angeles, Watts, 1965, 1966, the Black Power demand comes out of Mississippi. At this point, the independent aspirations of the African working class became clear. This new clarity fueled efforts to build independent political parties by and for the colonially oppressed African population. Nevertheless, our inexperience frustrated our efforts at party building. More often than not, we were unable to build parties that clearly identified the class interests they served. Generally, we were not able to show that the African working class had an interest in overthrowing the colonial oppression of our whole people. The party building movement was successful, however, in creating party formations that raised principles of unity going beyond the limitations of the liberal Black petty bourgeoisie. Those who could unite with militant anti-colonial principles that clearly distinguish African workers from the Black petty bourgeoisie joined the party and were able to characterize themselves ambiguously as revolutionaries and Black nationalists. Such parties began to characterize sectors of the movement that were trapped inside the limitations of reform as Uncle Tom's and sometimes as Black bourgeoisie. None of these parties was capable of raising up the interests of the Black working class as the hegemonic interests of the party. Although it was the pressure of the Black working class resistance and struggle that pushed this party building process forward. It was essentially petty bourgeois nationalists, often revolutionary, who were leading this effort. The Black working class was yet to seize leadership of its own revolutionary movement, even as history was pushing events in that direction with greater urgency. The Black Panther Party, which emerged in 1966-67, came closest to being the party of the African working class. For the first time in the history of our movement, an independent Black political party had identified itself as a socialist or communist organization with socialist or communist revolutionary objectives. Inherent to this identification was the assumption of a worldview with the interest, and there is a note here, because we want to point out that some people saw the African blood brotherhood as that, as a party that preceded. That was a party that existed in the early 20th century, the first quarter of the 20th century. But what is not recognized by many people is that the African Blood Brotherhood was an organization of sorts of the Communist Party USA, funded, etc., by the Communist Party USA. Inherent in this identification was the assumption of a worldview with the interests of African working class as its center. Certainly the vast bulk of the membership of the Black Panther Party was working class, and its 10-point program and platform raised fundamentally working class demands. The Black Panther Party gave the colonially oppressed African working class more experience in leading its own struggle than any organization before it. Nevertheless, it muddled its own effectiveness with an ideology that mystified the character of the Black working class under colonialism. Instead of elevating its membership to the highest stance of the African working class, the Black Panther Party idealized the traits of the lumpen proletariat, a non-working class element of unstable and unemployable people, as the leadership of the revolution. In this process, the Black Panther Party mistakenly identified colonized, unemployed Black workers who sometimes have lumping tendencies as the lumpen proletariat. Let me just stop briefly, because the lumpen is something that came out of Europe, and it means exactly what it sounds like a lumpen proletariat. The proletariat is recognized as the workers, especially the conscious working class. But there is a sector of the population, a developed sector of the population in Europe that was characterized as lumpen proletariat. These were folk who were not workers. In many ways, they were parasites in society. They were drug pushers, pickpockets. There were whole communities of unemployed and unemployable white people such as that existed in Europe. And there are certain characteristics of a lumpen proletariat. Because they are not disciplined by labor and things like that. They, generally speaking, don't have the long view. Because they are engaged mostly in criminal activity, they find themselves often having to collaborate with the police in order to even stay on the ground and do what they do. That's why you can see in some of the most criminally ridden communities, people often with their heads in police cars talking to cops and things like that, because in order for them to stay on the streets, the pimps, the prostitutes, the pickpockets, the people who make their living on the fringes of society, in many ways functioning as parasites of society, they have to establish relationships with the police departments. And this is what makes them unstable. And times of crisis, they often turn out to be incredibly significant street fighters. That's who often you will find fighting the police, fighting in the streets, but they're unreliable social force. And the thing is that you cannot characterize unemployed colonized African workers effectively and scientifically as a lumpen sector of the population. They would have some of the same characteristics because they also are not disciplined by labor. They often will not have the long view, in part because of the instability of their income, things like that. That doesn't contribute to people having a long view of society, of long view of anything. And also often they find themselves in establishing relationship with the police. When you look at the murder of Fred Hampton, it was such a lumpen person who the police arrested, and this happens all the time. Somebody gets busted by the cops make a deal with them that you become a snitch, an informant or something like that against the revolution, then we'll let you off. And so this relationship's established often between sectors of the lumpen. But the problem is that when you look at what has historically been known in Europe as the lumpen proletariat, you're looking at, in many ways, two hugely different sectors of a society. In the African community, you find the so-called lumpen and the workers going to the same clubs. They hang out at the same clubs, often go to the same churches, and have other kinds of relationships. And what you're looking at in colonial situation, where the colonizer defines who and whether anyone is going to have any work at all, you have an entirely different kind of relationship existing within the community than you do with the traditionally defined lumpen proletariat coming from the white European world. So mostly what you're looking at when you talk about that lumpen in the African community is unemployed African workers, and most often driven to states of severe desperation by their relationship. So anyway, we believe that it was a mistake, and that for the Black Panther Party to place all this emphasis on the lumpen. They at one point defined the lumpen as the vanguard, the lumpen as a revolutionary vanguard. And again, it's really an unstable and unreliable social force. And actually, it's not even scientific in our view to characterize this as a lumpen proletariat. It was an unemployed African colonized workers who did have lumpen tendencies. And that if you identify them as a lumpen, then you don't call on them to rise up to the highest stance of the working class. In fact, what you do is you lower the standards of the class war. For example, the Black Panther Party used to have, as part of its rules of discipline, that nobody could be drunk while doing political work, nobody could use drugs while doing political work, etc. As opposed to struggling against the use of drugs and the use of and drunkenness in general, and raising the working class to its highest standard, it lowered the standards in order to adopt the standards of this lumping defined entity inside our community. So nobody actually was required to represent the highest stance of the African working class. But we say that nevertheless, the Black Panther Party provided the closest thing to a revolutionary center that our movement had ever experienced. Although incorrect in some essentials, the Black Panther Party introduced the question of class struggle to our movement, a question that was briefly taken up within a large sector of the African working class itself. The parties of the white ruling class inside the U.S. are the Democratic and Republican parties. The objective of the Democratic and Republican parties is the perpetuation of the capitalist social system, which rests on the foundation of African oppression. Although both these parties are capable of prattle about democracy, the democracy they talk about is only a description of the form of the U.S. state, which exercises capitalist rule with its organs of coercion, such as the police, army, the courts, etc. That's the capitalist state. Besides being democratic, the capitalist state can take the form of dictatorship or monarchy, among others. So the capitalist state doesn't always look the same, but it's the capitalist state nevertheless. And so when we talk about the Democratic Party and the democracy that they talk about, they are talking about a description of the form of the state. The form of this state is not a monarchy, not quote unquote dictatorship, It is the Republican. It is some other methods that allow the masses to participate with some expression of solidarity with the state itself. Neither the Democratic or Republican Party is capable of talking about overthrowing the capitalist social system. Neither party will ever be able to bring about democratic self-determination for the broad masses of African people. This is because the capitalist social system within the boundaries of the U.S., perhaps more than any place else, rests on the foundation of African oppression going back to the days of what is called slavery. The Democratic and Republican parties have been excellent tools of the white ruling class precisely because they appear to give African workers, oppressed peoples, and even the general white population a choice in the United States. They give the illusion of providing alternatives and freedom of democratic participation in American political life. The Republican and Democratic parties make it possible for the white ruling class to monopolize political, economic, and ideological power while obscuring the class interests that they represent. Since oppressed peoples, like sectors of the bourgeoisie, are often ignorant of their class interests, African workers generally attempt to pursue their class interests within the parties of the white ruling class, especially the Democratic Party in this period. Within the US and most capitalist countries, there is generally, but not always, more than one capitalist party. This allows the bourgeoisie to wear two hats, a kind of good cop, bad cop routine. In this way, the bourgeois social system protects itself by passing political power to one bourgeois party when the other has come into disrepute with the people. The fact that the people can vote for one or the other bourgeois party gives the impression of political free will by the masses and acts as a social pressure release valve, blunting the development of class struggle. This is what is called bourgeois democracy. Actually, the people have not expressed free will, which presupposes information and science. Freedom is the recognition of necessity, which is prerequisite to exercising free will. Within the US and other places where more than one capitalist party dominates political life, elections are means of non-violent struggle by different sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. Within the US and other places where more than one capitalist party dominates political life, elections are means of non-violent struggle by different sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. The various, and you will read from time to time about struggles that's happening in different places in the world. They call them warlords, they call them militias and things like that. Somalia might be an example. This is an instance where different sectors of whatever powerful ruling forces go through struggle for control of the state through actual war. Here with the election, the bourgeois elections, these are non-violent struggles by different sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. So you don't have just warlords shooting off each other. You don't have, generally speaking, you don't have it reflected in violence in this way. You see this often when you hear about so-called ethnic struggles or tribal warfare initiated around an election, often in Africa. But what you're looking at is different sectors of the ruling class fighting for control of the state itself. And it's characterized a particular way depending on where it's located. And so the main point we want to make here is that elections are means, generally speaking, in these so-called democratic elections are a means of nonviolent struggle by different sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. However, it is not always smooth and easy. We've seen that in the United States with the overthrow of Richard Milhous Nixon, with his forcing him to resign, when sectors of the bourgeoisie became dissatisfied with how he was moving in the world. We saw that with the assassination of this guy Kennedy. We saw it with the attempted assassination of Wallace, where crises can become so deep within the social system that the particular class interest represents themselves sometimes more sharply than what the system was created to accommodate. And so Kennedy was assassinated, an attempt on George Wallace's life when he was running. Another Kennedy, two Kennedys, one Kennedy when he was running for office was assassinated. Nixon was overthrown. Ford was prevented from, after Nixon was prevented from serving a second term. So these are instances when the system, as disguised as it was, engaged in struggle that went beyond the boundaries that's usually provided through the electoral process of for nonviolent struggle for control of the state. The various social forces are not organized into their own independent class parties and engaged in conscious class struggle one against the other. Let me see, yeah. Instead, the American two-party system mobilizes African and other oppressed workers into the service of a sector of the white ruling class as it engages in intra-class struggle with another sector. The two-party system obscures the class interests of the exploited workers and oppressed peoples, reducing them to reserve forces for one sector of the bourgeoisie or another. And this is why you hear this complaint about Africans. Oh, the people die for the right to vote, etc., and black people don't vote. And Africans, of course, they talk about the apathy of the African voters that makes an assumption that the Africans are too stupid or too ungrateful to take advantage of what's supposed to be provided to them through the civil rights and other kinds of struggle. But the reality is Africans don't vote because there's nothing on the agenda that represents the interests of the African people and working class, generally speaking. So what you're doing when you engage in the system is you're most obviously supporting one sector of the bourgeoisie that's in struggle with another sector of the bourgeoisie for the control of the state. But if you put on an election, Africans have the right to vote for things like reparations to black people. Africans have the right to vote to free black prisoners. Africans have the right to control our own police organizations. Africans have the right to jail police, the murderous police, things like that. You will see an entirely different outcome in terms of elections. But the elections are not created for that purpose. They allow African people only to vote for one sector of the bourgeoisie against another sector of the bourgeoisie. We facilitate the interests of the ruling class. So, am I to understand we're having some technical difficulties now? Is that right? We live now. So anyway, we're calling back now to get connected to everyone else. Yeah. So okay. So we say that. Let me see where I am. Okay. Yeah. So,
welcome. This service is provided free. You entered, your input is invalid.
I want to try and expedite this process so we have some time for discussion, but I think that there's some really important points.
Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. You entered 2888. You are the first caller. You hold on. Being recorded. Please announce yourself.
Uhuru. So I'm sorry we were dropped off.
while we're waiting, Jim. I just talked to Tammy.
Okay.
I just talked to Tammy, and she said they're calling back in, but they were still online.
Uhuru, comrades.
Hold online.
Uhuru, comrades, we're back on. We're back on. Can you hear me? Can somebody just say yeah, yeah?
Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please enter your access code followed by the pound sign. You entered 28664. There are 35 participants in this conference. This conference is being recorded.
Uhuru, comrades.
Please announce yourself.
Uhuru, comrades, we're back on. And I'm going to go ahead and expedite this process because I do want there to be time for discussion. But I want to go through some other things that I think are really important for us to understand. So I'm on page 295, and I'm at the first full paragraph at the top. The question of class struggle within the U.S. has always been difficult enough, even without the two-party duplicity of the bourgeoisie. This has to do with the parasitic nature of the capitalist system. Within the U.S., this parasitism stems from a social system built on stolen land, the massacre of hundreds of thousands of native people, and the enslavement of African people. The entire white population, workers and bourgeoisie alike, and all social forces and classes that benefit from the development of the so-called New World, find their happiness and freedom from political oppression and material want at the expense of the life, liberty, and development of indigenous and African peoples. Hence, there is a material economic basis for the political unity that exists between the North American bourgeoisie and the general white population. This political unity is directed against the African, indigenous, and other colonized peoples here and around the world in defense of the capitalist social system. And by the way, you can define that unity that we're just talking about as national unity. If all classes in the white world find themselves united and identified in a certain way against everybody else, you're talking about a national unity as opposed to some kind of other contradiction. And I think that it's really clear that you see a national unity. You see the bourgeoisie, the white working so-called workers, etc., generally united when it comes to Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world. That has to be defined as national unity. And I think that's really important because that's where this whole racism and racial stuff gets really confused, because it obscures the fact that there is a national there are national forces. There are forces who constitute what are known today as nations existing in the world, and there is a white nation that works assiduously to keep the African nation from coming to consciousness of its existence and of its interests. And inside this country, it works to do the same thing when it comes to Mexicans and other indigenous people who are in the concentration camps. So we say that hence there is a material economic basis for the political unity that exists between the North American bourgeoisie and the general white population. This political unity is directed against the African, indigenous, and other colonized people here and around the world in defense of the capitalist social system. All the people in an uproar about terrorism and stuff like that, and bringing in the more police and closing the borders down and whatever else they're talking about defending the system. I don't care. I mean, they because their own asses, and I mean assets and asses, right, are so closely connected because there is a connection between their own personal situation and the system itself. You know, they end up they're always fighting to protect the system. When protecting the system, what are they protecting? They're not just, they're protecting themselves physically, they're protecting their houses, they're protecting the wealth and resources that come as a consequence of colonialism and exploitation. So even when you start talking about all this fight against terrorism, here you have the white nation closing down. And they don't just talk about keeping the Mexicans out, which is their own land, or keeping the so-called Arabs and Muslims out. The genesis of the profound national consolidation of white people in the final, the sharpest manifestation of that is the African contest between Africans in this country and white people. So that's why you see the tanks and stuff like that around African communities that they use in Africa. We're going to speak briefly to that, but it's also worth noting that you've seen mass people, white people with guns now surrounding mosques inside this country because it is national unity that we are talking about here. The parasitic nature of the capitalist system is the basis for the political and ideological leadership of the modern US-based African proletariat. The African working class is the only social force that has the exact combination of qualities which makes it an absolute volatile opponent to the capitalist social system. Along with the indigenous people, the oppression of the African people represent the foundation upon which the capitalist social system rests. The 19th century philosopher Karl Marx termed this economic relationship primitive accumulation. Quote, an accumulation not the result of the capitalist mode of production, but a starting point, unquote. The African proletariat exists as a domestic colony upon which the US capitalist system was founded. The African population is a colonial population within the belly of the US, a factor with explosive social connotations in and of itself. In addition, the African population is essentially made up of workers, with estimates ranging from 88 to 94% of the US-based African working class falling into the category of the working class. Racism or white nationalism, the ideological foundation of US and world capitalism, has as its basis primitive accumulation. The material foundation of the US and world capitalist social system that was born and maintained at the expense of African, indigenous, and other oppressed peoples. Inside the US, the class struggle against the capitalist colonial social system is centered in the colonized African population, which constitutes the true proletariat. Through the Black Revolution of the 60s, the African working class came to understand that the bourgeois parties are opposed to our genuine interests. When the Black working class was organized into its own party in the 60s with the Black Panther Party as its legitimate representative, the African working class became a formidable opponent to the US capitalist system. The threat of organized African workers was so great that the chief of the US secret political police declared the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to the internal security of the US since the Civil War. When the Black working class was organized into its own party, with its class and national interests summed up in the form of a political program opposed to colonial rule, the Democratic and Republican parties had to call into force the repressive arms of the state. These parties of the bourgeoisie were incapable of engaging in successful ideological and non-violent political struggle with the Black working class. So here we have political parties in the bourgeoisie actually functioning as separate representatives of the bourgeoisie, engaging in elections as non-violent struggles for control of the state. The Black working class consolidates in its own organization and begins to organize. Then these two so-called parties, in using the power of the state, engage in violent struggle against the African working class, attempting to address its own interests. You see what I'm saying? So you got non-violent contests going on between the Democrats and the Republicans, the bourgeoisie, sector of the bourgeoisie for control of the state, but both of these organizations, both of these parties, clearly represented in this, using the power of the state to engage in non-violent and to engage in violent struggle against the Black liberation movement. So they can't win the ideological and they can't win the political struggle, so they engage in violent struggle against because the Black revolution is not engaged in struggle for control of the state in the interest of capitalism. Okay, I hope I got heard on that. Okay, so it took an all-out urban war against the black working class in the 60s for a return to imperialist class peace and the reinstatement of the facade of a two-party system supposedly representing the class interests of the people. And you got to remember, at its height, we saw the Black Panther Party in particular even engaging them in the electoral processes, et cetera. I'm talking about during this quote unquote revolutionary period. This war saw African workers stand up alone, not only against armed police organizations, but even armed military forces usually reserved for foreign U.S. intervention. In Detroit, this included the 82nd Airborne Division. In urban areas throughout the U.S., military tanks and an assortment of other sophisticated armaments were deployed against the unarmed black working class communities. This was written 30 years ago. This is not Ferguson. 30 years ago, this is when you saw this, what Ferguson started. That's when you saw them having to put military forces in African communities throughout this country. The military offensive directed, and that's really important to understand because people talking about the militarization of the police in this country. When there's the beginning of what they now call the militarization was the need to suppress the African Revolution, particularly coming out of the 1960s. 1970 something, they created this program where the Pentagon was actually deploying arms in its budget, had created a budget where the U.S. was secretly, more or less, deploying military armament, training, and what have you to police organizations throughout this country, giving it to them in order to be able to control the African population here. That's its origin. That's what you're looking at. What people want to talk about class struggle, that's when you see the manifestation of the state, in the sharpest form. The military offensive directed by the Democratic and Republican parties was faced with the immediate task of putting down a massive movement with insurrectionary characteristics similar to that presently occurring in occupied Tanzania. That's South Africa. It was going on at the time. This military offensive or counterinsurgency was designed to destroy the will of the entire African working class, to struggle by crushing their independent organizations, particularly the Black Panther Party. And it wasn't just the Black Panther Party. I mean, this is a time where the attack on Jomo that I was a member of, the fact is that I was one of those forces constantly in prison. It was happening all around the country. The Black Panther Party bore the brunt of that attack because in many ways it was the advanced detachment. It was the vanguard of the moment. The U.S. ruling class used its military power, its state power, to defeat the independent revolutionary capacity of the African working class, the only internal social force that made it necessary to defend the capitalist social system. The African working class was the only social force inside the U.S. that was capable of challenging the bourgeoisie for power, the fundamental question for any revolution. For all these years subsequent to the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, the bourgeoisie has expended a tremendous amount of energy and resources in keeping the African working class politically disoriented, disorganized, and unable to come together organizationally in its own class interests. The methods for this have ranged from open white ruling class bribery of non-proletarian social forces to naked terror against the African working class itself. We've seen the bribery. People in Ferguson right now can tell you about the amounts of money that's coming in and given to these groups that call themselves, that are running around saying, hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter, et cetera. So you have, and then of course, there are the traditional forces like Jesse Jackson and Sharpton and others who are out there who benefit in 1,000 different ways from undermining the struggle of class struggle of African people. So we see naked terror also against the African working class. Evidence of the African working class in the popular culture has nearly disappeared. Michael Jackson, Jesse Jackson, Prince, and Lionel Richie have become the stereotypes of the acceptable African within the U.S. On the occasions when black, of course now there's Beyonce and whomever else that they, you know, I said her name wrong, huh? Beyonce. Yeah. Beyond saying. On the occasion when black working class elements are allowed to emerge as acceptable, it is as followers of Jesse Jackson to the Democratic Party, or it is as fictionalized, pathetic, poor black working class children who managed to escape colonial poverty through being adopted by well-to-do white petty bourgeois families as seen on television sitcoms. A significant sector of the liberal black petty bourgeoisie accepted neo-colonial roles in the bourgeois Democratic Party. This is a payoff in material resources and prestige for administering the African working class in areas where white direct colonial rule would be unacceptable. The Jesse Jackson presidential campaign was a manifestation of this, along with the bombing of an African working class community in Philadelphia by a black mayor and a black city manager. In the years since the 60s, the white women's and homosexual movements have become virtual scabs on the black revolution. These movements are incapable of raising up and supporting the black liberation movement, which is the quintessence of the class struggle within the US. The black petty bourgeois neo-colonial puppets and the women's and homosexual movements are conscious opportunist movements. They offer up the battered carcass of the collective African working class to the altar of capitalism as offerings of class peace in exchange for privileges for themselves. They all attempt to mute and obscure class struggle and call on the people to join the Democratic Party to achieve their aims. With the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, our independent working class organizations were destroyed, and the mass of black workers were disorganized and dispersed. A variety of petty bourgeois social forces, mostly tied to the Democratic Party, united with the white ruling class in assuring class peace. Such unity means the muting of any class struggle that has the interests of the African working class as its center. This is the context of the significance and existence and struggle of the African People's Socialist Party. Organized in 1972 from surviving black working class organizations of the 60s, the African People's Socialist Party pulled together the best elements of the class subsequent to the defeat of our movement. While we are a revolutionary party, we understand that our task for this period is not to make the revolution, but to build the capacity of the only consistently revolutionary social force within US borders, the African working class. This means that our primary task is to build the African People's Socialist Party. We must address our strategy for building a truly revolutionary African working class party. This is necessary because at least one petty bourgeois US-based African organization claims party building as its main task. We're talking about the All African People's Revolutionary Party here. This party does not distinguish its main task from its general aim. Hence, the task of party building has, for all practical purposes, become its general aim. The party uses the slogan of party building. This party uses the slogan of party building to obscure class struggle, to maintain the class peace, which is necessary for successful bourgeois colonial rule. For the African People's Socialist Party, fundamental to the task of party building is the need to smash the class peace. Otherwise, sectors of the black working class might remain ensconced within the Democratic Party. Additionally, the millions of African workers who have rejected the false choice of the two white ruling class parties will be unable to see that we must do more than just turn our backs on this pitfall. We must join and support our own independent parties in order to achieve our own separate class interests. For the African People's Socialist Party, the task of party building is always a process deeply rooted in solving the concrete practical problems of the revolution for this period. A key fundamental problem today is the reorganization of the black working class into its own independent revolutionary party. Say it again. For the African People's Socialist Party, the task of party building is always a process deeply rooted in solving the concrete, practical problems of the revolution for the period. A key, fundamental problem today is the reorganization of the Black working class into its own independent revolutionary party. We are not, however, talking about party building for its own sake. For us, the task of party building is for the purpose of solving the most fundamental problems of the revolution. We are informed of the practical problems of the revolution by our ability to sum up the period in which we live and assume the task of party building. Our summation of this period informs us that objective conditions for a revolution are ripe. The U.S. capitalist colonialist class is engaged in several undeclared wars, a fact which currently divides the ruling class. This is 30 years ago. The conditions of existence of the Black working class are reaching new and greater levels of desperation, and the use of overt police terror against the colonially oppressed African workers is becoming more blatant every day. 30 years ago, somebody who was not politically alive 30 years ago think they're being born into a new situation when they see Ferguson, when they see police killing, they see people choked to death, etc. 30 years ago, we were defining this reality because it was real then as it is now. And that's important for us to understand. Otherwise, you keep believing that you got a problem with police training, no body cameras and things like that. These conditions are evidence of the general crisis of imperialism. Although the election of Ronald Wilson Reagan as U.S. president was designed to confront this crisis, it continues unabated, nationally and internationally. Clearly, the objective conditions for the African Revolution are very strong. However, currently there are key weaknesses that we face in the subjective factors for revolution. So we say, clearly the objective conditions for the African Revolution are very strong. However, currently there are key weaknesses that we face in the subjective factors for revolution. When we talk about objective conditions, we're talking about objective reality, we're talking about that reality outside of our heads. When we're talking about subjective, we're talking about what's inside of our heads. So there is a reality that's independent of how we think about it. That is real. That wall is there regardless of what you think about it. And subjective, you can say the wall is not there and you can try to walk straight forward, but objective reality will kick you in the teeth. It will break your nose. It will harm you. So what we're saying is that the objective conditions for revolution are strong. That there's objective, but the subjective, what's in the heads, what's the content of the collective consciousness of African people. That's what we're looking at. So we say, these weaknesses in the subjective factors for revolution. These include the general state of disorganization of the African working class. This disorganization is facilitated by opportunism on every level. For example, there are the so-called revolutionary Black parties that are fearful of class struggle and Black working class hegemony over our own movement. There are the silver-tongued, bourgeois-sponsored, neo-colonialist Black petty bourgeois stooges whose prestige, appearance of power, and material resources are dependent upon their ability to speak for the masses of unorganized Black workers. There are the so-called communists and socialists and leftists of all stripe who can wear such appellations only so long as the African working class is voiceless and unable to impress our own version of class truth on the political life of the U.S. There are the women's and homosexual movements and every other social force that faithfully serves the U.S. bourgeoisie and who remember with fear and trepidation the undiluted power of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. In practical terms, party building today means first and foremost concrete work designed to activate the best of the class into political motion around concrete programs. Our immediate aim is to achieve absolute political hegemony over our movement and class in the process. Our immediate task is to achieve absolute political hegemony over our movement and class in the process. Party building means providing leadership for the class even when the party is small and has not yet fully achieved its desired capacity. For example, although small, the African People's Socialist Party has been able to ignite a social movement in Oakland, California. The party has successfully mobilized elements of the African working class. With the party as its center, this movement has been able to mobilize social forces of various nationalities into the service of the African working class and away from absolute unity with the bourgeois colonialists. Although most of the African workers in Oakland are not party members, the leadership of the party in that city has made it possible for African workers as a whole to experience and organize fighting capacity around real concrete social needs. The party-led Uhuru movement in Oakland has led a campaign to successfully challenge the basic assumptions of bourgeois property relations. For the first time since the 60s, the party has put the bourgeoisie on the political defensive in a struggle with African workers. In 1984, the African People's Socialist Party put an initiative on the electoral ballot in Oakland calling for community control of housing. Known as Measure O, the initiative called for residential rents to be set no higher than 25% of the average income of a neighborhood. Measure O also called for abandoned houses to be turned over to homeless people. Essentially, a land reform measure, the initiative won 25,000 votes, a quarter of the votes cast, despite $500,000 spent to defeat it by the Oakland landlords and realtors. Thus, our small party, in the process of party building, was able to provide leadership for African and other working class elements in a fashion greatly disproportionate to our physical size. More than this, the voters who were won to a working class stand in that election stood against the leadership of the bourgeois parties with whom they are registered. The party building process must awaken the Black working class to practical participation in its own political life. This is why party building is not an abstract process. Real political struggle must be coupled with real practical leadership of the class when building the party. The party must be capable of mobilizing and leading the African working class in various social forces of various nationalities if it is to be worthy of the name party. Today, we are confronted with a period when the last significant political lesson to be summed up by the Black working class is military defeat. Still reeling from the US military assault against our movement in the 1960s, the masses of African workers today are restless. They have not yet, however, again concluded that their own interests are summed up in the African working class party, or that joining the party is worth the risk of life and liberty that may be suggested by party membership. Nevertheless, African workers must still have the leadership of the party available to them and be able to claim the party as their own. For the African People's Socialist Party, the party building process is an open one. We believe the African working class and our allies should have some ideas of what parties are and what their functions are. We think that our supporters should have a better grip on what it is they support and whether they support and whether their support is what it needs to be. The African People's Socialist Party is a revolutionary African working class party, the only such party in the US. We are organized around a common general program and policies that were ratified during our first party Congress, the highest body of the party, comprised of representatives of the entire membership. Our general program and our policies are the practical, concrete manifestations of our revolutionary theory of African internationalism. African internationalism, and we have here, this is bad, is Pan-Africanism developed to its highest stage. Pan-Africanism during the age of imperialism. African internationalism unite the African people of the world in a revolutionary process to liberate Africa under the leadership of the African workers and poor peasants. You should read the footnote that's associated here, footnote 11, and it clarifies this whole question about African internationalism and Pan-Africanism. The theory of African internationalism is ever developing with the new experiences of the international working class, African and otherwise. It is based on a scientific method of investigating and analyzing social life. It recognizes that the current oppressive circumstances of African people have their basis in the slave trade, the fundamental feature of the development of world capitalism. The scientific method of investigating social life employed by the African People's Socialist Party is called dialectical and historical materialism. By dialectical, we mean that our approach to the investigation of all phenomena is all-sided, taking into consideration the past and the present. Dialectical means that we take into account the relationship of a phenomena in motion to all other phenomena, even as phenomena comes into being and dies away. By materialism, we mean that our analysis of phenomena is based on an investigation of a phenomenon itself, not requiring an explanation of phenomena outside of it. I used the example earlier on, if you want to understand something, you investigate the thing itself and not the Bible or something else like that. You understand why we hurt, why we poor, why we suffer, then look at, you examine the society and not the Bible. And that's what we mean when we say that our analysis of phenomena is based on an investigation of phenomenon itself and not requiring an explanation of the phenomena outside of it. By historical materialism, we mean the application of the principles of dialectical materialism to the investigation and interpretation of society and social life. The opposition of the African People's Socialist Party to the US government and the capitalist social system, which rests on our colonial oppression, is total and absolute. There are no circumstances under which we would ever find the foreign domination of our people or the economic exploitation of our class acceptable. We are convinced that capitalism, the social system, was built off the slave trade and the theft of life, liberty, and resources of African people and the non-European peoples of the world. We understand that the world's stolen resources are concentrated in Europe and the US and are owned and controlled by a tiny minority of the people on the planet. Moreover, we are convinced that this capitalist system is on its deathbed. We believe that the future belongs to the dispossessed, colonized workers of the world. When armed with a revolutionary theory and led by a revolutionary party, African and other oppressed workers represent the conscious subjective forces of history necessary for the overthrow of capitalism. This is the only way to bring about the advent of a new social system organized under the leadership of the working masses, the real producers of all material wealth. This new social system will end the production for profit and ruled by a non-working minority who maintain private ownership of our resources and control of the means of production. We believe that the new social system that will follow capitalism is communism, a just social system based on labor according to ability and guaranteeing to each person the material resources of life and its reproduction according to need. Communism is a system that the white ruling class and all its hangers-on are attempting to suppress with the oppression of the African working class. Thus, we recognize that the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced conscious detachment of the African working class, is, like the class itself, locked in a life and death battle with the US capitalist system. Hence, the members of our party represent the advanced sector of the African working class. They must constantly strive for a self-motivated discipline that is steeled by conviction. As the advanced detachment of the African working class, the African People's Socialist Party assumes the responsibility for advancing the cause of the whole class, which at any given time may be battered by ignorance, drug addiction, alcoholism, demoralization, or other contradictions. The members of the African People's Socialist Party must become professional revolutionaries, individuals whose real profession is revolution with the party as their vehicle. The African People's Socialist Party recognizes that the colonially oppressed African workers are the most consistently revolutionary social force within the US. The African working class will not achieve revolutionary consciousness on its own. However, it is the task of the African People's Socialist Party, even as it is being built to full capacity, to intervene in the day-to-day struggles of the African working class, to forge deep lines in struggle and to lead the class in an ever higher, ever more precise understanding of African internationalism, the science of Black workers' revolution. The African People's Socialist Party, a revolutionary African internationalist party based on a revolutionary African working class theory, is a party of professional revolutionaries. All distinctions between workers and intellectuals, laborers and professionals lose their significance. We are welded into one by the common cause of a proletarian future that is being advanced by the party of the colonially oppressed African working class. On one side stand the bourgeoisie and all the institutions which serve to preserve its rule. On the other side stands the oppressed African working class, represented by the African People's Socialist Party. Together, these two social forces represent the great contest of our times. Separately, they represent the past and the future. The conscious representatives of these two great social forces are choosing sides. Every day makes the choice by the African working class and our allies more critical. For us, the question is clear. The future will prevail. It is urgent for all those who are taking a neutral seat as spectators in this contest to take up the call. Take the great leap forward and grab the future in your hands to help shape and mold it in our lifetime for this generation. Those who can must join the African People's Socialist Party. Those who cannot must support us. Build the revolutionary party of the African working class. Build the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru. So I wanted us to go ahead and Uhuru. I'd like to open it up now for discussion. See how we understand and how much unity we have with what has been discussed up to now. Can we? I want to open it up and see if there's someone who wants to participate in this. And remember, everybody should be muted, so you'll have to unmute and let's talk. Uhuru. Uhuru.
Uhuru. This is Tim Moringa.
Yes, Uhuru.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this was a great PE. I learned something every time that you give us this kind of information. I just wanted to know if you could go a little bit into drawing some distinctions between the African People's Socialist Party as a revolutionary African party and organizations that have party in their name, like the New Black Panther Party. What is the distinction and even the structural differences? And I know it's ideological differences, but it seems like those organizations are not even parties as such. Can you say a little bit about that?
I think they're parties, but I think that I think they're parties. I mean, I think they have a program, however poorly presented to the world, that they stand for, they organize around, and what have you. I think the question for us is whether they are actually revolutionary parties. And we've defined, I think, pretty succinctly what we think constitutes a revolutionary party and its task. And I don't know anything, I've never heard of anything by the Black Panther Party of a program for the actual seizure of power, political power. I don't even know if there's anything in the program, in what they stand for, that calls for a seizure of Black political power. So, I mean, I can't speak for it because I don't think it's that clear. I do believe it's a party. And to some extent, it seems like what you see is a kind of unity of the African petty bourgeoisie and lumpen type forces that we do see emerge in history and have seen emerge in history at different times. But they are not revolutionary organization, and they can be distractions and problematic as well. Uhuru. Anyone else?
Chairman. This is Brother Cam.
Yes, Brother Cam, how are you? Brother Cam out of
Good,
Chicago.
I just want to unite with you. I want to unite with you in your summation of America being a white nationalist structure, and to attempt to interact with it from the inside, just perpetuate that white nationalist power. There's a book by Professor Gerald Horne called The Counter-Revolution of 1776, where he states that the War of 1776 was a counter-revolution to the Black Revolution that was taking place. And in order for them to create this country called America, they had to create a pan-European identity, because Europeans came over this country as warring tribes. They brought their tribalism from Europe. And in order to defeat the Black Revolution, they had to create a pan-European identity, which today we know as racism. And that they did that by creating special laws for Blacks and special laws for whites, to bring whites all together. We know that as Black codes, and we see these same laws being two forms of laws today, Black laws and white laws. And they created a force, the police force, or the paddy patrollers, or the overseers to enforce those laws. And we see the same things going on. So those same forces that created this white nation are still in existence today from the 1600s. So I just want to unite with you on that.
Uhuru. And that's absolutely right. I mean, when you look at the police is an organization of state power, of coercion, force, etc., that's there to perpetuate the existing social system, which has come into being as white power throughout the world. We call it capitalism, but it's white power. And even when you look at, we were having some discussions on yesterday with some of the leaders of the party, that we're saying that even because we think that it's extremely problematic for African people to join the U.S. military for whatever reason. I don't care if you need a job. I don't care if things are bad. They going to give you a loan after you get out. If you get out. The thing is that the police, the military has to be seen as international police force that has the same function in the international community as the police in your community has domestically. And just like the police organizations suffer a serious problem because most Africans won't join the police department. And that there should be the same kind of opposition to joining the U.S. military. If people understood that you're still looking at the police, it's got a different uniform, etc. So it is the police. The state is the same. It's a state that came into existence for the purpose of protecting this setup that we know is white power, capitalism, etc. And it's interesting the various manifestations of white nationalism and white national power. Uhuru. Anybody else?
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru.
It's Fossey.
Foots. How you doing?
Hey, I just want to say I'm good. Rested. I just want to say thank you for help showing. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Now, yes, we can.
Okay, I said I want to thank you for painting the journey from beginning to where we are now, and the things that we have to look out for, and why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
Uhuru.
Yeah, the objective is. Yes, Will. Go ahead, Comrade.
Yeah, I think a big part of getting the masses involved right now is overcoming demoralization, especially here in Chicago, where horizontal violence is pushed, really, really heavily. That's something we have to sum up and sum up the root cause and, and attacking that root cause of it. And, all the other stereotypes that's pushed on Black people. I think, if around we, attack that demoralization, I think we could win this.
I've heard that. Go ahead. I heard that before, not just about Chicago, but someone will remember that at one of the national conferences that we had, I think it was the National Conference of Black Community Control of Police, where Comrade Lawrence Ham out of Newark made the statement that the period was characterized by demoralization of the masses. I disagree. And I'm not saying this because I don't think that we having serious experiences inside our communities by the the violence in the community, by the horizontal violence, people killing each other and that kind of thing. But that's not the primary character of the situation in Chicago today. And that is revealed to us by the thousands of goddamn people in the streets of Chicago. They're not trying to shake the thing up and demanding the removal of Rahm Emanuel by demoralization. The fundamental character of the position right now is struggle. And I think that we could do, how we understand this can affect what we do politically at this particular moment. And I think that understanding and deepening this whole crisis, that they're going through a severe crisis. The bourgeoisie is going through a severe crisis in Chicago now. I mean, the call for Emanuel's head, the forcing them to fire the police chief, the growing exposure of the violence that's being perpetrated against African people, not horizontally, but by the state itself, is a profound crisis for them that we need to really take advantage of. And our political struggles need to see that as central, even as we take on the other question that you just mentioned, because what you will find is, to the extent a mass of the people are thrown into the struggle against white power, you will see a decrease in the kind of horizontal violence that exists in our communities. We saw that momentarily even in Ferguson. For a while, the so-called black-on-black crime and violence went down when the real enemy was defined. Of course, the problem in Ferguson is that the petty bourgeoisie has assumed the leadership of the struggle, and that obscures what the interests of the masses of African workers are. That's what our struggle has in Chicago, has to do. It has to sum up the essential contradiction that we're confronted with, and place that whole horizontal violence that exists among us in that context. So it's not that horizontal violence is not a problem, but the crisis that's being experienced right now by the bourgeoisie is the mobilization of masses of African people and the growing consciousness of African people about the class enemy, and how that's going to be interpreted and understood. The final analysis is going to define how we move in Chicago. Uhuru.
Right. Uhuru.
Yes.
This is President Herdosha.
Uhuru, Sister President.
I just really appreciate this whole, I just really appreciate everything. And I just wanted to deny what you, Chairman, with what you were just saying, because that's what us comrades have to realize when we go out and do the work. Is when we go in these spaces, the people don't have the answers. We do. That's why we go into those spaces. They just know that they are resisting the system that is being forced, and they don't have the words. And I just really appreciate what you said in purposes, because I was just going out to say something that I knew something was wrong. I never had the words that you had gave me at that point. And that changed like my whole being, and it gave me insight to see the contradictions that I would face every single day.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to go. Like, that's our mission. It's not the people, it's us. We have to not let the bourgeoisie leading. We have to go and deepen and give the people the words that they never heard before.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm 36 and I didn't have those words to understand how horizontal violence was a form of state. You know, to be in that contradiction and to deal with those things. So I just, you know, I'm just really excited, you know, about this time. And, you know, my thing is, I don't think we're going to win. I know we're going to win. We have to know we're going to win. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I just really appreciate that. And I just say, you know, comrades, you got to struggle for the science, man. You have to struggle to understand these times of horror.
I remember, Comrade Sister Herdosha, I saw a week or so on Facebook, you were talking to two young Africans in Chicago in the community, and they just stood there looking kind of bored, I thought, for a while until they thought you said that they should work with the police. And that's when they lit up and said, we don't work with the police, we don't like the police and what have you. And of course, what horizontal violence is designed to do, in part, in addition to terrorizing the African population and making, pushing the African population toward unity with the state. That's really part of what it does, is have you call on the police, have you call on the slave master to solve the problem. I mean, that's part of what the horizontal violence is designed to do. But I just looked at how they responded to what you said, what they thought you said, and it wasn't like we need to be protected. With police need to come in and protect us. Their immediate response was, "These are two young people, you know, right in the community. We don't like the police. We ain't got nothing to do with the police, etc." I think that's a basic sentiment, even with all the stuff that's happening to us. It's not working, and I think you make a serious mistake, Comrade Will, if you see the greatest problem of demoralization. Sometimes we take our own, misinformed class view. We project our own feelings and stuff onto the people. People out there in the streets. Even when we are not out there in the streets for 1,000 different reasons, people out there in the streets, they want to bring this stuff down. They want something bad to happen to the police. They want something bad to happen to Rahm Emanuel. They want something bad to happen to the system. And I think that's the thing that we need to really lock in on, and that manifests itself in activity. It's not a discussion. I mean, people may talk a lot about how the people are bad and self stuff, and I know there's a certain sector of the nationalist community that was filled with that kind of demoralized nonsense, but the masses out there want to kick ass. And what we need to do is get them steel-tipped boots and directions in terms of how to best go about a bunch of bourgeois ass kicking. Anybody else? Uhuru. Uhuru, yes.
Yeah, in response to
who is that? Who is that?
This is KP.
Where you at?
This is KP.
Where you at? Where you at, comrade? Okay, that's K-Thing out of Houston. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to respond to the question Will raised about demoralization. I think for all practical purposes, Ferguson, Missouri, ended the demoralization in African communities throughout this country and a whole lot of other places in the world. This study is the bill of advanced detachment of African working class, African people social employed. Because, you know, the people in the streets in Minneapolis, in fact, all over the country. So it ain't the people that are demoralized.
Yeah.
It's that our party needs to go and lead every damn struggle that we see.
Yeah.
You know, because it's obvious that the masses are in motion.
Yeah.
I think it was Dosha said, our responsibility is not them. It's on us.
Yeah.
Now, so let's lead this thing, because I don't see no demoralization nowhere.
Yeah. Except the police are demoralized. Rahm Emanuel is demoralized. The police is demoralized, increasingly, you know, etc. That's what the demoralization. The imperialists are being demoralized at this time, and we become demoralized to the extent that we accept their fate as our own. You know. Go ahead, Comrade Life.
I really want to appreciate the study. It's a substantive study. It's a very informative study. The analysis is clear, and time has proven that it is correct and accurate. I have a historical question. You have noted that right after the Second Imperialist World War, there was the only place that the imperialists, or rather white people in the North, could find labor power was among sharecroppers and other forces like in the South. Can you say a bit about why that was the case? It was no other labor force accessible at that time.
It was the case because the second imperialist war, of course, was a war to redivide the world, just like the first and others. But at the end of that war, the Soviet Union and Russia, led by the Russian Communist Party, or Bolshevik Party, and the Soviet sphere included most of the white countries in Central and Eastern Europe, where that had been the traditional reservoir of white workers that they would bring into the United States to keep America white and that kind of stuff, and brought white workers from those places. But at the end of the Second Imperialist War, with the power of the Soviet Union, most of these countries were now under the authority and leadership of the Soviet Union. They were in the Soviet sphere, and those workers were no longer available to the capitalists in this country. And so that's why they had to look toward black people in the South to come and work in the factories, both in the South that they wanted to have us in, particularly in the northern industries, etc. And the bourgeoisie that was associated with those particular interests were those who mostly came to be known as the liberals, white liberals in the United States. Uhuru. Anybody else?
Uhuru. This is Daphne.
Yes, Daphne.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, come in.
Everyone, I'd like to just speak on like what Will was talking about as far as the demoralization and why, you know, that it's an importance of a focus. Yes, there are thousands been hitting the street here in Chicago in regards to the situation. However, what has been the thing is those thousands, mainly those pushing in those contexts, are at the same time pushing against more or less like the lines that we push, okay? The majority of those are the children of petty bourgeoisie. You have the BYP, that's pretty much the majority that's out there. These are all just university college students. A lot of them are the children of the same politicians. Some of them, the aldermen and all these, they remove and will not, you can't even get them to say certain elements, things that they aren't even allowed to say or push, even to the point where they try to push back, you know, the element of any black power structure, I'd say, with the people that are generally being affected, you know, really aren't out there. We really haven't responded because it is still an issue going to them, and their concern is, I'm not eating. Is we gonna get some jobs? Is this gonna happen? This is a lot of things that, you know, that's going on here. It's very difficult to politicize the people. The dynamics here are so, it's heavy. And I understand that our colonization, everything is everywhere, but there's a different air in Chicago right now. Chicago is going up. But the thing is what we're trying to grab the narrative. A lot of things are coming out. A lot of things that are happening are only ready to replace those that are in office and not to change anything. And they're pushing back, you know, the message that we're bringing of bringing it down and taking power. And, you know, it's a lot of that going on. And you got a lot of, just a lot of the usual that's going on. But when you get the attention of the people, is catering to the people. And when I say that, as to say, our strongest point and our strongest people, we still have a very low African working class here because the people are demoralized and the people are just disconnected from our struggle, period. And they see this happening, but they're so used to, and it's become become so common of this type of thing. Oh, they arrested such and such, they fired such and such, they're going to investigate this, that it doesn't even, the people doesn't see that as anything happening now, because the same question remains of how they going to eat and how they going to live.
Well,
so it is, I would say just it is very important to focus on that and to see that, because the only way to get the attention of the people to the politics is to get their struggle and find a way to address that.
I think on the
ground, boots on the ground with me.
I think in Chicago, what we are looking at is Holman, what's it called, Holman Square, where hundreds of black people have been taken to these damn dungeons and tortured without the benefit by the police, without benefits of lawyers and things like that. Where the John Burge, who tortured by himself nearly 200 or more African people, where the police run rampant and killing black people without anything happening. And I'm telling you that this thing that happened with when they murdered this brother, and they able to see it on the video, and that helped to spur this thing. This was not college students who were simply upset. All of the black people, not just in Chicago, but everywhere else, were inflamed, were incensed by what that happened, and that they're lucky that rebellions didn't happen, you know, in other places because of that, and because of the more that we see. And the Chicago police are notorious. They murdered Fred Hampton, and they have never not been killers and things like that. And I'm saying is that when you see this critical factor in our lives, which is the colonial state power that controls and dominates us and makes the status quo function as it does, come under assault, you see mobilize thousands and thousands of African people around the country. And yes, I mean, I know there's a sector of the population in Chicago and other places, like I said, when we were in the Black Community Control of Police Conference in St. Louis last year, I think it was, the chairman of the People's Organization for Progress stated that what the situation was characterized by demoralization. He wasn't in Chicago. He was talking about generally speaking, and I'm saying that's wrong. That might have been true on August 8th, 2014, but since that time, the demoralization has not characterized the situation. That's why we have police and all kinds of efforts being made to make sure that black people do not rise up. So demoralization may be a factor, but that is not the determining or defining factor right now. The defining factor is willingness and need to struggle by masses of African people, and that's what a revolutionary party of the working class has to understand if we're going to make the revolution. In terms of what the people think in the demonstrations, they think what the petty bourgeoisie leaders tell them to think. They thought that in Ferguson, they thought that every place else. That's why the role of the party is so critical, so that we take the science of revolution into those struggles. So I'm not surprised that if in Chicago they push back against that, they push back in Ferguson, they push back in various other countries. They kicked me off the stage. They threw me off the stage when I spoke before the masses of people in Ferguson on August 30th, 2014. So the thing is, they do that because they control the narrative right now. And part of the narrative is demoralization. There's anything other than making a revolution, taking revolutionary science to the masses of the people. Uhuru, yes. Who is that?
This is Cornell Jamal.
Yes, Cornell Jamal. Uhuru, out of Atlanta.
Yes, out of Atlanta, out of Atlanta.
Yes, come on, Uhuru.
And I definitely want to say that I definitely agree with what you just said. I know from my experience and talking with many people about this very subject is that the consensus from where I am is that a lot of African people who are witnessing these struggles and different things that are going on within the community is that, you know, are waiting for state, local, and federal governments to make changes and accommodate, you know, whatever situation that's going on to suit them. When the reality is that, okay, there's a certain power that's already in place. And people who are in power are not willing to let it go.
Yeah.
So instead of, you know, people, you know, wanting, you know, protesting or, you know, this, that, and the other about, you know, having these
governments that are in place make the change, then what is our position on creating an alternative to what's going on? So instead of having, waiting on the police to make changes, I like the idea of Black community control of the police. So why not create some type of African people security force to protect our own people? Even things economically or psychologically, when it comes to, food, getting, our own stores,
Please mute.
Mute your phone. Please mute if you're not talking.
Especially just got on with the child.
That are definitely needed.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Sorry, I think
please.
a bunch of people just got kicked off the line. That's why there's reconnection.
Oh, okay. But a lot of stuff came in with people who are not muted. So can we get a sense? Are you there, Herdosia? Will, are you there? Will, are you there?
I'm here.
Cam, are you there? K-Fing, are you there? Yes, I'm just trying to get a sense of, I understand some people were just kicked off. We only have a few minutes left anyway, but so let's just mute if you don't mind. I just want to say that I agree with Comrade Cornell. That's how we try to build a party. And I think the position. No, we just talk to people. The position for those of us who.
Please mute. We hear you dialing, whoever that is, please mute.
Anyway, the point that I would make is that there's a different position with those of us who assume the responsibility to take power, and then those of us who are simply observing and protesting with somebody who's in power. With those of us who intend to change the conditions of existence of our people, and that's what the Revolutionary Party of the African working class is about. It's about taking the power, about changing the conditions ourselves, about being able to measure the balance of forces that exist, that stand between us and freedom. And I think that what Brother Cornell Jamal was just talking about reflects that position, that we have to have the power, and that in measuring what the circumstances are in the world today, what we're doing is measuring this distance, this contest, this balance of forces between those of us who do not have power and intend to take power and those who do have power. So the question of demoralization falls somewhere to the side of that, when what we are measuring is how are we, where do we stand today as compared to yesterday in this balance of force between us and them? Where do we stand objectively speaking between the power of the people and the power of the state in Chicago? And no matter what else is said, that the state is on the back foot. The state, the police has been pushed on the back foot in Chicago. And the people are experiencing this as well. And I mentioned that this video that I just happened to see where Comrade President Herdosia was talking with, young people right there in the heart of the Chicago African community. And at the moment, they mistakenly thought she was saying something about, because she was saying Black community control the police, and they thought she was saying that we should be working with the police. I mean, they were adamant, and this was obviously, just a snapshot, but I think generally speaking, that's the reality that we are confronted with. And the brother who was gunned down in Chicago, this was no alderman's son or anything like that. This was just from the working class, just like young Mike Brown and just like, all of the other people who they've been killing throughout this country. And that's the thing that's shaping and helping to determine the morale of the African population, the fact that we're finally fighting back. the fact that we are finally fighting back. Uhuru. So, yes, comment.
Isn't it one comment before you go? Listen, I think that we can judge the pulse of the people when we out in the streets and people who we know and who we talk to.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, people in Fort Ferguson, you could not get a discussion out of them about what the police did.
Yeah.
But right now, any African you talk to are open, not demoralized, don't want to struggle. What can we do? What can we do?
Yeah.
You know, so I just don't. Yeah, I mean, anybody you talk to.
Yeah.
The whole consciousness of the people in change. You know, it's always probably.
Oh, come on, guy, you were gonna say? Yeah, we have to.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Yes.
I know, Uhuru, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm self-critical. I know we gotta go. But this production, I just want to say this, Chairman. You know, I'm poor. I'm a peasant. You know, I got contradictions all the time. But what I'm inspired by is by the Socialist Party having the science. To believe in that new world. You know what I mean? And so we have to take that to the people. You know what I'm saying? We got to take that to the people out there. It's our job. Again, it's on us to go out there and give the people the truth for freedom. You know what I'm saying? Let them understand the contradiction. You know what I'm saying? That's us. On the ground. You know, it was only 2 boots on the ground when they got me. And every time we snatch one out of their hands and raise the contradictions, we win.
Uhuru, comrades. Uhuru.
All right, we have to end now. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, so I have some announcements to make before everyone goes. I'm about to make some announcements before everyone goes, so please stay on the line. I just want to do a quick roll call because we're missing 7 people. We have 26, but it announced that we have 35. So if you didn't announce yourself, please do so now.
Chimarenga.
John Thomas.
John Thomas.
Jordan Geiger.
Jordan
Thomas.
Jordan Geiger.
You're on already.
You're on already. People that have not been called.
I've not been to any roll call.
Mike from Chicago.
Mike Brown.
This is Olivia in DC.
Sorry, one moment. Mike.
So
Mike Brown. The last person I got was Mike Brown from Chicago. Please, first and last name. Mike Brown from Chicago.
That's it.
Okay. We got you, K-Fing. Who else did we not get?
You got me, Livia. You got me in DC.
Livia in DC. Okay, next.
One person more. One more person.
It's more than one. It's more than
one.
Brian out of LA.
That's LA.
It's not it.
LA.
Yeah.
Who else?
Stephanie.
Stephanie from where?
Oakland.
Okay. Anyone else that did not announce themselves already?
My mom was on it too, but I think she fell off. Her name is Charmaine.
I'm still on. Charmaine Geiger in Indiana.
All right. Charmaine Geiger from Indiana. Uhuru.
Anyone else?
Unique in Tampa.
Everyone, please mute your phone so we can hear everyone clearly. Anyone else?
From Chicago.
What you say your name was?
Can you say your name again?
From Chicago.
No, your name, not your city.
Bernica.
Thank you.
Bernica.
Thank you. Uhuru.
Get Abasi out of Georgia.
Abasi
X.
Thank you, Abasi. Uhuru.
This is Dave.
Day. Uhuru Day.
Uhuru Day.
Out of New York.
So it's 41.
New York, yes.
Who was that?
All right, thank you. So that should be
the same day from New York.
Yes. Anyone else? That's it. Great. Okay, so I just want to let everyone know that we will be transitioning into different ways of communicating and doing this because it's growing so fast. Right now, we have over 40 people. When we started, it was about 8 or 9, and it's really growing. So we want to match the capacity. We're also doing live stream. We're also doing live streams on YouTube. So people can view it on there as well afterwards if you missed out on anything or called in late. But always try to tune in live at 8 a.m. so you can ask your questions. We also need to document all participating members to keep you informed and involved about what's going on. So make sure to go on the Eventbrite that we email and send out and register on the Eventbrite. One of the announcements we have is we have the party plenary, the African People's Socialist Party plenary that is happening on January 9th and January 10th. And you can register at apsplenary.org. At apsplenary.org, apsplenary.org. Please register as soon as possible. This is the opportune time to buy tickets because they are low cost right now, 20 days before the date of flight.
And who are you?
Oh, this is Gazi Kodzo. I am the leader of NORM, which is the National Office of Recruitment and Membership. I apologize for saying that. I'm not saying that. Oh, and the APSC plenary for everyone that's not African?
Well, no, everybody.
Everybody, oh.
Yeah.
We have the APSC plenary also on January 11th. We will also be doing, we're doing a call for members. So if you are interested in joining the party, if you are not, locked in, please go to joinapsp.org and fill out a recruit form. So it's joinapsp.org. And now I'm going to be giving it over to Javon, who's going to tell us exciting news about our radio station. Uhuru.
Want to appreciate Comrade Gazi and everybody on this phone call. We have exciting news about Black Power 96 FM here in St. Petersburg. We will be having, we have kicked off our fundraising campaign, and we had a boombox bank just for you to take. We're looking for $96 in 96 days. And you can go to blackpower96.org and order your bank, and we will send you a bank, and you can help with the fundraising for building the African community radio station here in St. Petersburg, Florida. So again, that is blackpower96.org. You can get you a bank. We'll send it to you, and $96 in 96 days. Please support Uhuru.
Uhuru, everyone. See you all next Sunday at 8 a.m. And remember to go on and register at the Eventbrite. All right, everyone. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Gazi. Gazi, do you have the names and email addresses of everybody on the phone?
Uhuru, comrade. Uhuru.